The Sam Sorbo Show is brought to you in partnership by the Herzog Foundation.
Hi there. Welcome to the Sam Sorbo Show. I'm talking today with an expert on education. You will not want to miss this. Here we go.
Sam Sorbo.
Sam, welcome back to the program.
We're glad to welcome Sam Sorbo.
It's great to have you here.
All right. So welcome to the Sam Sorbo Show. I'm going to read this bio because it's very well worded and I love the way that it comes across. This person that I'm about to interview is a true trailblazer in the world of education. She's the CEO of Edovate Learning Corp. And for over 35 years, she's dedicated her career to empowering families to take control of their children's education, something that's very near and dear to my heart, through Bridgeway Academy, which is often called the Tesla of homeschooling academies, along with other innovative resources like elefango.com and the Discover Blended K through 8 curriculum. She's revolutionized the way parents approach learning, which is what we really need in this country. Her quote, she calls it learning without walls. This is a philosophy that encourages families to create dynamic, personalized educational experiences that go beyond the classroom and make learning an exciting adventure. Please help me welcome Jessica Parnell to the Sam Sorbo Show. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Sam.
Well, and it's great to talk to you because you've obviously been at this for a very long time, and I'm sure you have a lot of information to impart to my viewers who typically, I think, are mainly homeschoolers or people who are at least flirting with homeschooling. Let's start a little bit more at the beginning. Like, how did you get into this racket? And
Sure.
what are you hoping for?
Sure. Well, I experienced the world of home education really from the time I was in college when my parents actually started the what is now Bridgeway Academy. But where I really dove in is jumping in as a teacher. I taught in the public school system for several years. And while there, I was also the leader of the gifted club, the student council advisor, the journalism advisor, coach of volleyball, coach of softball. So I was interacting with kids in all different ways and really getting to see that we call people gifted in classrooms because they're academically gifted, but these kids are all gifted in different ways. And because I was interacting with them outside of the classroom, that aha moment came where I realized we can educate them in books all we want, but they have gifts and abilities outside of those books that we don't want to squander. And that's where my philosophy of learning without walls took root.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating because that was one epiphany that I had, that education was a lot more than just the academics. And that's completely missed in a system that focuses entirely on test scores and academics. And, you know, we're disserving children who maybe don't perform well. Like I was a non-performing test taker. Like it was very hard for me to take tests. I had a lot of anxiety. And children who suffer, and by the way, like anxiety's off the charts, maybe that's linked to the low test scores. Who knows, right? So that's fascinating. So your parents actually started Bridgeway Academy.
That is correct. Back in 1989, my father had a passion for Christian education and helped start 130 schools, and then dove into home education because at that time, homeschooling families had won battles across the nation for the freedom to homeschool. And there were many in our interactions that had been put in prison for home education or put in jailed for home education.
Right.
And so we won the rights, but publishers wouldn't sell to homeschoolers. So my father said, well, I'm going to start a school. We'll buy the curriculum and we'll get it to the home educators. And that's how Bridgeway Academy was born.
Wow. So are you still brick and mortar schools as well as online, or how does it work now?
Well, we have different divisions in Edovate. One of our divisions is Curriculum Express, and we support brick and mortar schools with curriculum and needs for their schools. Yes. We also have, through Bridgeway Academy, we support micro schools, private schools, alternative learning centers that are brick and mortar, meeting in person, whether that's hybrid or every day. But those are our passion, because there's where they're really meeting the learners in an environment where those students have that interaction, have that freedom to homeschool their way, but those connections that many of them miss.
Are you saying the social connections are made for the homeschoolers? They can have the social connection that 1 or 2 or more days a week. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
What age do you think is important for kids to make those social connections? Or do you have a thought about that?
So it's a good question. I mean, our kids, there's the misnomer, the myth that home ed school kids lack socialization. For any of us who have home educated our kids, we know that's a myth, right? Our
Right.
kids interact with other kids of all ages and adults and sports teams, and have opportunities to dive into internships, apprenticeships, work experiences. So they're experiencing socialization at all different ages, which is more real world, more real life, correct?
Right.
Where in life do you ever stay with one age group once you hit the workforce? So that's first is a myth. And I think our children, there are opportunities to socialize. I think it's important for our kids to interact with other individuals, but they don't need to be children their own age. They can be parents, grandparents, family members, mentors, younger children that they're able to lead, and older students that you can truly look up to and can be mentors for them.
Yeah, and in fact, I think we might be able to go so far as to say that the schools do a disservice to children by concentrating them in groups of their age peers, which is not
Correct.
necessarily their peers, right?
Correct.
So it might actually be doing them a disservice, certainly preventing them from the homeschool experience of basically having those multi-level, multi-age interactions at any given point.
That is
That's
true.
interesting. So you've studied now, I'm sure, like the neuroscience of learning. What can you share with us that you've gleaned from all of your experience?
Well, if I tie it back to home education, the first and primary lesson that I share with families around the neuroscience is it is so important to understand that the area of our brain that takes in, processes, understands, recalls information is the prefrontal cortex, and that uses up 20% of our energy in our body. So when our kids start to struggle and have spent an hour already focused on a task, or 20 minutes are focused on a task, and they start to struggle and their prefrontal cortex is working at overtime, they literally can't learn. They struggle to understand. And so when I was an early home educator, my personality style is very high D in the disc profile. And it's, we're going to get this done. We're going to stay focused. Let's finish early. Let's take a half day. And when I started to study the neuroscience, I realized,
Tiger
no,
mom?
yes, you could say that.
Okay.
So, but I realized the importance of those breaks, those brain breaks. So I encourage homeschool families, take a break even between every subject. Just give those kids an opportunity to move their spine, because every time you move your spine, you're sending new electrical signals to your brain and you're getting that brain ready to learn again. And that helps students overcome some of those learning struggles, because as they struggle, their emotions kick in. Those emotions, that emotional amygdala takes over, dampens the prefrontal cortex, which is their ability to learn, and they will continue to struggle versus take a break, go breathe, come back, and they're ready to dive in again.
It's such a good lesson because, when you're an adult, it's true you can hear something once and know it, but that's not the same for children. And we forget that. We're like, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Actually,
Right.
no, you haven't. You only said it the one time and it didn't stick. So try again.
Right.
And these poor kids who are, maybe they're desperately trying to learn, but they're inhibited by their own emotions.
Mhm.
I know that anxiety is a
Mhm.
barrier to learning. It's a barrier. It's like a full
Yes.
stop. Nope, nothing's getting past the anxiety. Here's
Mhm.
the anxiety. You try. No, right?
Right.
And yet, this is what we do to kids so often, even when they homeschool, even when it's a little bit more of a relaxed day. they can still take in that anxiety. I'll tell you a quick story. My daughter graduated this past year, and she decided to go back to Latin because she felt like she didn't really get it. And she came careening down the stairs the other day, and she's like, "Mom," I can't remember what but the accusative's actually the direct object. Like, I knew that, but I didn't really know it. Like, I knew it, but now I really understand like what we're talking about. And it's just because she had put so much pressure on herself. As you can tell, she's like super type A. So she was going to learn it, but she didn't really learn it. And I think we get caught up in this idea that there's a deadline to learning. Does that make sense?
Right. 100%. Yes. And that is our goal as an academy, and in all of the products we build, is to shift that thinking to creating a love for learning and a curiosity, and allow those kids to follow that curiosity, to dig deeper into things that they are interested in, and to explore topics that maybe they wouldn't otherwise ever be exposed to.
And maybe that's their calling. Like, you just don't know.
Right.
Your kid might. So yeah, it's imperative on parents to understand maybe it's less about you and it's more about discovering who your child is rather than dictating who he should be or something. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it's interesting because many times we think that home education frees kids from that, but not always, right? Because as parents, we put pressure on ourselves. We're comparing our kids to the ones next door. We want to be sure they're up to speed, that they're many times families come and say, I want to be sure they're on track with the public school. And we say, wait a minute, you don't want to be on track. You're going to be far advanced from what those kids are getting in a group setting. But we put that pressure on ourselves, and therefore we pass that on to our children. And that anxiety, as you mentioned, results both on the parent side and on the student side.
What do we do about that? This desire to be competitive. In other words, a desire to meet status quo or exceed status quo, or, the whole comparison thing when your child is unique. How do you address that?
So one of the things we do when we meet a student in Bridgeway Academy is we test them for learning style, personality style. We check their academic level, and then we interview them and the parent. What do you love? What do you hope to do in life? To the parent, how involved do you want to be in the home education? How independent do you want your students to be? And then we tailor a fit to fit them, and really look at how do we continue to pour into their strengths and help them build up those weaknesses, but also point them to why this matters in life for where they want to go. And our commitment to them is that we are going to find a fit that works for you so that you can pursue your own personal excellence. And whether that is in speaking or debate or mechanics or engineering, right? We want to help them uncover that while they're young. Because so often, as you said, if they're in school struggling with tests, the message they send to themselves is, I'm dumb, I'm stupid. Those are the words we hear students come to say to us all the time.
They're struggling with anything.
Correct. And they miss all the strengths because our brain tends to focus on the negative. And if we as parents are also saying, we want you to be on par with,
here's the bar
on the street, right?
Jimmy set the bar. Jimmy over here set the bar. So make sure you're up with Jimmy on that, whatever it might be.
Then we can add to that pressure. And so really trying to help parents and students embrace the strengths of students and not be so consumed with test scores, tests in general, right? There's other ways to assess students' understanding than a physical test. So just really trying to break that mindset that has been ingrained to them, either as students or as parents whose students have been in the school system and they're pulling out of it.
Right. But I think you're dealing a lot with parents who were in the school system.
Correct.
Right. And so the parents have adopted all of these sort of arbitrary, I would say, metrics that just they've inherited from the schools, from their own personal experience in the schools. And I think, I wonder if some of it is, well, I failed math, so by golly, my child better not fail math, or, so because they felt like a failure at some point, that would be like the worst thing to befall their child, even though demonstrably they're successful in their lives, whatever it is.
Right.
Like they are their own refutation, but they can't see it. And so they just fall
Exactly.
back on, well, this better work. Do you deal with parents who are like, but how do I get my child into Harvard? Like, how do I make sure my child gets into Yale or whatever? Do you deal with that also?
We do. We have a number of families that are looking for that Ivy League experience for their students, and we can help them with that. We have actually our academy takes them all the way up through an associate degree, so they can take college credits while still in high school and have that count toward a future. Obviously, in those situations, well, maybe not obviously for all the listeners, but in those situations, we want students to shine in their strengths even more, because to set themselves apart, it's not about your academics, not about community service. It's about, what are you doing to demonstrate that you are pursuing your passion and pursuing the strengths that you have. So we help them through internships. We had a student, one of my favorite stories, he was very passionate about the medicine. He'd hoped to go into medicine.
That's okay.
He did an internship with a local Good Shepherd, which is physical therapy for the elderly. And while there, he started to work with individuals who were struggling with dementia. And his project for us was to keep a report and a recording. And these are experiences. What are the insights I've learned? Well, he turned that into an actual paper that he submitted into a medical journal and was published while still in high school. He was recruited by those Ivy Leagues. In fact, the one that he ended up agreeing to and gave him a car at the time they were allowed to do that in order to get him there. So that ability for him to go after that in a way that fit what he loved gave him that ability to set himself apart.
It's great because you've obviously facilitated that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the parents may not think of that, well, let's see. I mean, if you really are interested, there's got to be a nursing home around here that would want somebody intern, but with your imprimatur, you could sort of say, well, this is a school program, and so you really should do it or whatever, right? As
That's
opposed
right.
to the private thing that, and a lot of people are, I think, really shy about doing that kind of thing. So that's awesome. I want to ask you, now that we're in storytelling mode, do you have any stories of different learning styles? So that I'd love to give the audience, some of whom may know this, but many of whom likely don't. Like, what do we mean when we're talking about different learning styles? Because it's kind of nebulous. Like, either you're learning or you're not, right?
Right.
Maybe not.
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned earlier that you were not a test taker in school.
Yeah.
And many times the individuals who are not test takers because they're very analytic and they look at this question and they can justify every single answer. That tends to be a trait of a visual learner because they think globally. And so they are able to see the big picture and connect the pieces together. And they sit down, take a multiple choice type test, and they literally can find a way to fit every one of those answers into that correct box. My daughter, very visual learner. She, right from the start, from young on up, we might not enter a location we might have been somewhere 6 months before. At age 3, she would recognize it and tell a story about it. And she's able to make the analogies. Experience this, it reminds me of this. Saw that early on. So we could see those visual learner tendencies and are able then to tailor her learning. It's not about let's give them graphics and pictures. It's about help them see the big picture and connect the dots on their own versus teaching them sequentially. So an auditory learner, which I have another daughter who's auditory. She was speaking at 18 months old. I could read her a story and she could be jumping on the trampoline and she could answer every question that followed, even at 3, 4, 5 years old. But those auditory learners learn best by hearing their own voice. So it's not just hearing and processing, which is a big strength of an auditory, but it's the ability to speak and retell the story and put it in your own words that really helps solidify those learners. So we see auditory learners tending towards careers like the law, communications, areas where they can utilize the strength of quick processing what they hear and communication very well.
And you put them in debate.
You put them in speech and debate. Yes, yes.
There
And
you
help
go.
them pursue what they love. So my auditory learner, she loved the oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank on it. So debate, but also the where she went and role played in the
Yeah, it's a dramatic interpretation.
no, it was the law. It was
Mock trial.
mock trial. Okay. So my auditory learner absolutely loved mock trial. But she was certain she wanted to be a doctor. When she went to school, to her first year of college, she went as a pre-med major. And I said, you know what? You don't even touch raw chicken. What are you doing in medicine? Well, within a year, she realized it's not where she belongs. She pursued the law. She's an attorney now. She ended up full ride scholarship into law school, just flourishing. And those auditory skills that she was growing all through life have become super invaluable to her.
Right.
But she would not be that visual learner. If she walks into a room to take in the information that she sees, she doesn't have that same strength that her sister does. So it's different approaches. And then last, the kinesthetic. We believe every learner should be read-write. So we push that in all of our different learning style materials. But for the kinesthetic learner, it's not necessarily just tactile. All of us learn best through hands-on, but it's through movement. So a kinesthetic learner who's moving can take in information in any modality well. It's that need to move. And they're the ones who are moving their hands or moving their feet when they're learning. They might be bouncing a basketball while practicing multiple choice, you name it, or multiplication, you name it. They are the ones that have strong body connection, strong muscle memories, but also learn very well as long as they're moving. Imagine that in a classroom, right? As they're young learners sitting in a classroom designed for an auditory learner, which, by the way, in the school population, only 10% of kids are auditory. And yet our whole system is designed around auditory learners.
What's the majority? Visual?
The majority is visual, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is 10% are auditory and only 2% of auditory learners are boys.
Oh.
So when you think about the classrooms with the overdiagnosis of ADD in boys and the desire to make these boys sit still and they're losing control and or unable to be focused, it's because we're actually trying to push them into a mode that they don't learn.
Right. It's crazy. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about gifted, double gifted learners, get into that. And I'm also going to ask my guest about her personal educational background and a few more personal questions along those lines, but all still in the vein of education. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hi there. So for years, I've been harping on the problems in our schools and the fact that most of our government schools, our factory schools, have been overrun by this progressive ideology that is really at war with our traditional American values, our Judeo-Christian values. And parents have finally started waking up more and more, which pleases me to no end. But they're worried about what to do. They're not sure which way to turn, and that's why it gives me great pleasure to announce my continuing partnership with the Herzog Foundation. So the Herzog Foundation is a trusted source for K through 12 Christian education. They have a really remarkable suite of resources for parents and for families. They have an online publication known as The Lion and a network of podcasts, including mine. So they can offer a wide range of advice and information for Christian parents to make the best decisions regarding the education of their children and the values that they instill in their children. And so if you want to find out any more about this remarkable organization, just go to herzogfoundation.com. That's herzogfoundation.com. Thanks so much. Spark curiosity and inspire discovery with Light Lab by Suzanne Schara. This hands-on, engaging curriculum brings science and faith together, exploring topics like energy, light, and the wonders of God's creation. Perfect for homeschooling families, Light Lab helps kids discover and develop a deeper understanding of science while growing their faith. Visit lightlabetc.com and use code SAM10 to get 10% off your order. Illuminate your child's education with Light Lab today. All right, welcome back to the Sam Sorbo Show. My guest here, I will add her back in, Jessica Parnell. She is the CEO of Edovate Learning Corp, and it is the umbrella corporation for a number of different learning outreaches, let's say. And we're talking obviously homeschooling, but also just different platforms, different methodologies for getting your kids educated. I love the idea that you really are about serving the child, which really should be what education is. We're trying to serve these kids and give them the opportunity to learn, which is the most important thing. And so we don't want to set up stumbling blocks, which is what you and I both have discovered sort of appear in our schools, whether knowingly or unknowingly. We don't have to get into that, but there are learning blocks in the school system. But I want to talk to you about gifted learners. And I want to start with dyslexia, because we see it as such it's a lot more common today, seemingly. Maybe it's just more diagnosed. But my understanding is that dyslexics proportionally enter engineering and mathematics a lot more, which kind of defies logic, because you're like, but they can't look at things properly or whatever. Somebody said the other day that if you are divergent, meaning that you don't fit right, you just don't quite fit, you're probably better off in today's school environment, because you learn early on, because you don't fit, not to rely on them or trust them, or basically take what they say to heart. You figure out, oh, I need a workaround for all of them, for all of that, right? And so you're actually maybe better off. And so we all know super high achieving dyslexic people, and that, they went through hell and then they just overcame all of it and they, flourished. So I don't know, talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure.
You have so much knowledge.
Well, I think I hadn't heard it said that way of sort of trying to work around them or not trusting them. But I think one of the benefits of struggling in school with things like dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADD is that you learn not to give up. So you learn the tenacity to say, you know what, it's hard, but I'm going to buckle down and I'm going to continue to push. What's interesting about a dyslexic brain, and the fMRI studies show that a dyslexic brain actually has larger neural connections. So they're not as intricate as others, but therefore they make larger leaps as they connect the dots between things. And this is why they tend to be entrepreneurs, inventors, engineers, because they can see things that others can't. Now imagine that brain in a classroom measuring themselves based on their ability to read, write, and regurgitate information versus their ability to see things other people can't. And so far too often, they leave school so discouraged, and some never overcome that. Some go on into adulthood not overcoming that.
I was going to, you painted a really pretty picture at the beginning. You're like, well, the good thing is, they tend to persevere and power through because they're driven. But I know too many that, nope, that just wasn't for me. And I dropped out in 5th grade because I could tell they just, Joe Rogan is one of those, right? And so he knew that if it interested him, he was laser focused, and you couldn't drag him away from it with the ADD, right?
Yep.
But if it didn't interest him, it literally was like a blip on it, like not even a blip, right? And he couldn't get interested to please anybody. And and so that's where I think partly where this theory came up with this idea that if you have a learning, I'm going to use air quotes, disability, because it's only a disability if you conform to the system.
That's right. That's right. And for someone like Joe, that ADD brain operates so much faster. They could take in information and process information so much faster than others. And that's many times why they get restless in a classroom, right? Because you're you're being asked to keep up with a classroom that's moving much more slowly, then your brain has already moved on, right? And so,
Right.
but when they're deeply interested, they're diving in and diving deep. So it is a disservice. As one of the things we constantly say to parents is, please do not drug your ADD students up. Like, I understand there are some cases where it's extreme and it's needed, but it is so misdiagnosed, and they lose that opportunity to really shine in areas where others can't.
Well, yeah. I mean, can we just say the medicine is not settled. They don't have long-term studies.
That's right.
You're participating in an experiment by giving your child drugs.
That's right.
You just are. And unfortunately, I do know many people who succumb to that, but his life is so much better now or whatever. And I'm just like, I don't know that this is a very difficult conversation. It really is.
It is. It is.
Yeah. What do we mean by twice gifted learners?
So the twice gifted learner is usually defined as someone who is both gifted and has a neurodivergence. Those students I can give you an example as a teacher. One of my favorite students, his name was Dan, was twice gifted, highly autistic, highly capable, but he was dyslexic, dysgraphic, you name it. So I met him in 11th grade. He could write a paper for me on the computer that would rival any of my graduate school papers. Just brilliant mind. But if you asked him to write it, not only was his writing poor, but his thoughts could not be captured, and he sounded like a third grade, kindergarten in some cases, because he was so highly gifted but struggled in those areas. So it's the neurodivergence, really. You're gifted in academics in some way, and you have a different gifting or struggle in another way. And those students can often, it's interesting because when a student is highly academically gifted, they don't have those struggles. They sail through school, and then they hit a point where it is a struggle, and they tend to stop dead, many of them, because they haven't built the resiliency to push through struggle. Whereas your twice gifted many times have the strength of both, because they've had to struggle and they've had the opportunity to really pursue their gifts.
Fascinating. I didn't think of it that way. I do know, I mean, I can think of examples of very gifted learners. So the system worked really well for them, but when they hit real life, they were like, whoa,
right.
Now what do I do? Because no one taught them how to manage real life. Exactly. And of course, that's one of the biggest failures of our school system is it's convinced parents that it's going to train your child to live in the real world, and it abjectly won't. It will infantilize your child. So that at this point we have a new word. I don't know if you've heard this word, adulting.
Yes.
Like, okay, I'm going to start adulting now because they've never done the adult things like sign for a car or whatever. It's kind of funny.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I typically have 3 questions that I like to ask my guests just for fun. What is your educational background?
Sure. So I started as a psychology major in college and then shifted to become an educator, secondary education, finalized my master's in English education, and then went on to pursue a master's in neuroscience. So always around learning.
And so this might seem like an odd question, but do you use it in your current career?
Always, always. I think one of the where it became a little unique is that when I pursued the neuroscience, it wasn't about education. It was just neuroscience in general, neuroscience of leaders, the psychology. And everything I was learning could apply to education because of the fact that that's the background that I brought. And so it informed all of the products that we build. So our elefango.com is all built around the neuroscience of learning, how do kids best retain.
I should ask you, what is elefango.com? Like, we should cover this.
Sure.
Like, a whole panoply.
Okay. So Elefango was The vision for Elefango came out of our commitment to our Bridgeway Academy families who, when we, as I mentioned, when they enroll with us, we guarantee a fit with the curriculum that we recommend, with the extracurricular items that we put together for them. But if they had a struggle in a concept, we didn't want to sell them another book. So we started to write these. What we did at that time was dropped it in an email and a PDF of a different way to teach a lesson. And eventually we said, let's catch up to the real world and let's put this online. And so Elefango was born, and the vision was to become the Google of homeschooling. So everything in there was written to the student based on the neuroscience of learning, really working hard to grab their interest and to let curiosity drive them to continue from that lesson to anything else where that grabs their interest, or to dig deeper into a topic through badges. They can have run streaks. There's leaderboards. There's all kinds of gamification in Elefango as well. But it's the strength is that it's written to the student. So it's not written for a teacher to reinterpret and deliver. It can be given as independent learning for students.
Nice. I should ask, is it all Christian based, mainly Christian based, not Christian based?
It is, there's a biblical foundation to it, but the lessons are not there. There's a toggle to turn on Bible lessons versus the core subjects. So if you're just diving into core subjects, it's not blatantly Christian, but the underlying worldview is from a Christian perspective.
Gotcha. And then you have Discover blended K-8 curriculum. So tell me about that.
Correct. So Discover was a response to COVID in reality, because we had a flood of families deciding to home educate their elementary kids because they said, I don't want to school at home. I want to homeschool. And they thought they wanted online. So as I said, I studied neuroscience. The last thing we want to do is put our elementary kids in front of a screen all day long to learn. So we said, let's build a responsible elementary curriculum that blends online with work text, with conversations with parents, and hands-on activities. And that was the vision for Discover. So we really leveraged the best of online. We leverage the strengths of pencil paper that is so proven in neuroscience to help students process information. But more importantly, we make certain that we honor the role of parent, because too many times the curriculum becomes the truth versus I want to have a conversation with my parent and they get to help me understand, or they get to help build my worldview. So we built that piece in as well. So we're very much coming from home educators ourselves and seeing the struggles out there.
Jessica, like, you have all the right things to say. Like, somebody gave you a script before you came on, because this is all fabulous.
It's important. It's important in home education.
What's the connection? Sure. Make the connection for me between the writing and the brain. Like, there's a connection, right?
There is. So the neural connections that are established much more strongly when we actually use the physical act. And that's from hands-on activities to the physical act of writing. Right. It's actually building stronger neural connections with the information we're taking in. Even now as adults, I tend to take my notes on a computer. I do not retain it as well as when I actually have to physically write it down.
Yeah. When I go to church, I take notes by hand. Like, I'm a hand note taker. In other areas too, but specifically on Sundays, like, I take notes by hand because I like, and I don't have the science background to know exactly, but I get it. There's a connection. Yep. There's definitely, so that makes sense. All right. My last question is, what advice would you give your younger self? You can pick any age, just one bit of advice to give your younger self.
So as I was emerging into adulthood, I had this picture in my mind of what a female should be, or an adult should be. And it was the antithesis of what my personality style was. So I said, I'm a high D. I wanted to be the S. I wanted to be the person who nurtured relationships, who saw people's needs. It was natural. And I rejected who I was designed to be, literally avoided personality workshops, et cetera, because I just didn't want to face that that's who I was. And it wasn't until I embraced that and said, finally embraced, God designed me this way for a reason, that I began to gain the confidence to be who he designed me to be. Until then, I was constantly muting myself to try to be the person that I thought was the ideal. So my advice to my younger self would be embrace it early and understand that you're designed for a reason and a purpose. Embrace it early and build on those strengths.
Right. Lean into your giftings as opposed to denying them. It's like the
Exactly.
opposite of imposter syndrome.
That's right. Exactly.
It's like, I know I'm that. No, I don't want to be
I
that.
want to be that.
That's funny. That's funny. That's very, that's quite profound. Thank you so much. Jessica Parnell, we will have links up for people to look for you and all that stuff. So I want to thank you for coming on the program.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Great talking with you, Sam.
So that's it for the Sam Sorbo Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Remember, speak truth and speak it boldly.
The views and opinions expressed in the Sam Sorbo Show are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of the Herzog Foundation.